Okay, that's good.
Good evening, Professor Zhiqun.
Hi, who is this?
Good evening, Professor.
Oh, hi, Bobby.
Professor Deepak.
Oh,
Professor
yeah.
Deepak, how are you?
I'm doing good.
Please be safe.
Yes, so far so good.
Okay. Thank you so much for your support. Okay.
Now I can see you now. Great.
Well, Professor Zhu, we have, besides you, at least one more India expert in the audience.
Yeah, Professor Deepak, feel free to chime in later, when we talk about the India or India-China relations.
Yeah, that is my area of research, but not India. I'm not an Indian expert as such.
Is your family in Delhi now?
Yes, all of us are here, confined to JNU. JNU relatively a better place, a bigger place, where you have freer, you can say, environment and enough place to move around, better than other places.
Okay. I think we can start now.
Good evening, everyone. Greetings to everyone. Thank you for joining us in today's dialogue on China and the world in 21st century. This forum is organized by World Scientific Publishing and named after the journal China and the World, Ancient and Modern Silk Road to promote communication and exchange on China and BRI-related themes. Today, we are pleased to have with us our special guest, Professor Zhu Zhiqun, Professor and Chair of the International Relations Department at Bucknell University, USA, as well as our moderator, Professor Feng Xuan, Honorary Dean of Hainan University, Belt and Road Research Institute, and Chief Advisor of the China Silk Road I-Valley Research Institute. They will be the main speakers of the dialogue and will reply to questions during the Q&A session. Please leave your questions for them in the Zoom chat, and I will read them on your behalf during the Q&A. Now, without further ado, let us welcome Professor Feng and Professor Zhu.
Sorry, Professor Feng, you're on mute.
Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, as the case may be. Welcome to the webinar with the title China and the World in the 21st Century. I am truly honored today to be the moderator of this webinar. This is organized by World Scientific Publishing Corporation, or WSPC. Of course, as was mentioned earlier, this company publishes an important journal now with the title of this webinar. Today, I'm especially pleased that we have a special guest, and that is Professor Zhu from Bucknell University. For people who are familiar with the issue of China's foreign policies, Professor Zhu needs no introduction. He is a well-published author on Chinese foreign policy and the US-China relations, and other places as well. And he is frequently quoted by major international news media. Ladies and gentlemen, I think you will agree with me that had this discussion occurred in the 70s or the beginning of the 21st century, what we will discuss then will be vastly different from what we will discuss today. In fact, I think even as recent as 4 or 5 years ago, the content will be different from today. So why is that? Well, in 1997, when Hong Kong reversed its sovereignty back to China, the Chinese GDP is only 1/8 of the United States. 23 years later, in 2020, it is 1.4 versus 1. Such a GDP rise for a nation of 1.4 billion is probably unprecedented in human history. Until fairly recently, China is an inward-looking country. This is true not only in the past several millenniums, until the beginning of the 18th century, when China and India were two economic powerhouses. The Chinese do not venture out of China. As such, there was no such thing as a Chinese foreign policy. For example, during the Ming Dynasty, when China had a massive and powerful navy, where Admiral Zheng He led 7 expeditions to Southeast Asia, South Asia, including, of course, India, Middle East, and East Africa. Middle East because he was a Muslim. He did not bring back to China 1 inch of colony. In 2013, President Xi Jinping initiated a Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI. The BRI places unprecedented demands on China as a country and Chinese as a people. The BRI demands China and the Chinese to open their eyes to see the world. This means appreciating and understanding the large number of cultures and ways and means that was totally different from the Chinese becomes an absolute necessity and not a luxury. I remember as recent as 2006, when I was invited by a good friend who is one of the founders of Huawei. Huawei, everybody knows what it is now. I don't have to explain it. To visit its headquarters in Shenzhen, China. At that time, I recall the annual revenue of the company was about $11 billion US. At the same time, Samsung of Korea annual revenue was absolutely well above 100 billion. I remember asking my friend whether sometime in the future, Huawei would catch up with Samsung. His answer was succinct. He said that, no, we Chinese simply don't think big. Well, what happened to Huawei in the past 17 years clearly had proven my friend wrong. With this new realities and new demands, the issue of China and the world in the 21st century is a truly exciting and fascinating issue for humanity, not just for China, but really for humanity. We hope our discussion today will be what the Chinese will refer to as 抛砖引玉, or throwing a stone and draw a J. Let me say something about how we will proceed here as housekeeping. First, Professor Zhu will deliver his opening speech, not long, it's a short one. This will be followed by a dialogue between the two of us. Because there are so many important and interesting issues on the table, our dialogue will be restricted to 3 regions which I have some deep personal experiences. They are the issues of Taiwan, which in the lingo of East Asia, that is often referred in Chinese as Liang'an, or both shores. India, because it so happens I was born there, I have a particular interest of India. And of course, Southeast Asia, because that's where I grew up. We hope by doing so, we can warm up the interest of the audience here, which is quite large already. And by discussing 3 issues here, how China interacts with the world in the 21st century. After that, we will open the dialogue to the audience in the Q&A session. And now I will give the stage to Professor Zhu. Professor Zhu.
I guess I don't have the stage, but I have the screen now. Thank you very much, Professor Feng, for your kind introduction and very insightful opening remarks. I'm so honored to spend the next hour with you and our audience to chat about China and the world. Thank you so much for having me, and also want to thank the World Scientific Publishing for providing this venue to discuss the important topic. Since the theme today is China and the world, let me start with some thoughts about the most important relations between China and the world, which is the relationship between China and the United States. Many of us probably are wondering why relations between China and the United States have not improved after President Joe Biden took office. I remember there was much hope and expectation that Biden would depart from Donald Trump's confrontation approach towards China before he took office. Today, I guess probably many of us are wondering or are disappointed that US-China relations are stuck in competition and confrontation with very limited cooperation. We actually see more continuity in Biden's China policy than change. So let me offer some preliminary observations about why US-China relations are unlikely to improve no matter who is in the White House. First of all, I think we all know that China is quickly catching up and challenging the United States' dominance in world affairs. And the United States feels threatened and insecure. Over the past few decades, China has been moving onwards and upwards. It has been developing too fast, much faster than anybody has expected, including China itself. The sheer size of China, with over 1.4 billion people, the world's second largest economy, an authoritarian government, and a modernized military, is truly frightening to many countries, including the United States. Secondly, I would argue that Sinophobia is prevailing in Washington. The United States is simply unprepared or perhaps unwilling to accept China's rise. US Congress is categorically, fervently, perhaps hopelessly anti-China, unable to come up with any constructive ideas to deal with China. Many politicians in America feel paranoid about China. There is a bipartisan consensus in the US that China is a dangerous threat to the national interests of the United States. In Washington nowadays, it is politically incorrect if you are not anti-China, let me tell you. Number three, I think China itself has become more confident and assertive in foreign affairs. In foreign policy, China has gradually replaced Deng Xiaoping's Tao Guang Yang Hui, or keeping a low profile policy, with a more active, assertive, and even aggressive approach. While Western powers and some of China's neighbors are not used to China's rise, China has not been sensitive to other countries' concerns and anxieties. And finally, I think the conflict between the United States and China is really structural. And the two countries are struggling to figure out how to manage the global power transition that is ongoing now. The United States was challenged before by Germany, by the Soviet Union, and by Japan. But their challenge was one-dimensional, either economic or military or ideological. China's challenge to the US dominance is multi-dimensional, from economic to military, from technology to governance, and from regional to global. So can China and the United States manage the power shift peacefully? will the growing rivalry lead to a military conflict, especially in the South China Sea and in the Taiwan Strait? It seems that both China and the United States are unprepared for such major transformations in the international system. I think due to all these reasons, unfortunately, the US-China relationship will remain tense and difficult in the years ahead. I feel sorry that I have to begin with such a pessimistic note, but that's truly what I think. And I will stop here for more dialogue with Dr. Feng. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much, Professor Zhu, especially for outlining the current tenseness between the United States and China, and something that living in the United States here, I feel it every day. Let me talk three issues here with you. The first one is, I think everybody will be interested in, is Taiwan. Well, having spent 7 years as a senior academic administrator of two top Taiwan universities, the National Cheng Kung University and National Tsinghua University, the relationship between Taiwan and the mainland, or two shores, as I mentioned earlier, is of particular interest to me. During my 7 years there, which was literally the 7 of the 8 years of the KMT in power led by President Ma Ying-jeou, the relationship between what we refer to, the relationship between the two sides, the two shores, becomes closer and closer year by year. I remember that the academic interactions between universities on both sides are frequent. In fact, there are times as a senior administrator, which I will be receiving more than one delegation on a single day. In particular, nearly all campuses in Taiwan universities, one could find many, quote unquote, continental students, 陆生. However, since my departure, and the government is now in the hands of the opposition party, the People's Progressive Party, the relationship between, Democratic Progressive Party, 民进党, the relationship between the two sides have deteriorated significantly. With this as background, it would be interesting for everyone here for you to give some discussion as to the position of Taiwan in the geopolitical sense. In particular, what do you think how the United States, which surely it will have, should play a positive role to ensure that there is a good and peaceful outcome for Taiwan and the mainland?
Thank you, Professor Feng. I'm not sure whether I know what kind of positive role the United States can play. If the United States is not playing a negative role, I think we should be happy, actually. You're right, indeed, Taiwan is a core issue in China's foreign relations and the most difficult problem between China and the United States. Because this issue involves history, sovereignty, democracy, and great power competition. From a historical perspective, of course, China lost Taiwan when China itself was weak. After Qing dynasty lost the 1894-95 war to Imperial Japan, Taiwan was colonized by Japan. And at the end of the World War II, of course, Japan surrendered and returned Taiwan to China, the Republic of China at the time, under Chiang Kai-shek's rule. Unfortunately, as soon as the war with Japan ended, the Chinese Civil War resumed. So Mao Zedong's communist forces defeated nationalist forces in 1949, when Chiang Kai-shek's ROC government retreated to Taiwan, and Mao established the People's Republic of China on the mainland. So Mao was planning to send troops and liberate, quote unquote, Taiwan shortly after the PRC was established. And the United States actually was prepared to abandon Taiwan because the United States felt that the ROC government under Chiang Kai-shek was corrupt and extremely unable to rule. And they saw the hope in this new China. In June 1950, the Korean War broke out, which actually saved Taiwan. China was dragged into the Korean War, and the United States sent its 7th Fleet to the Taiwan Strait, essentially blocking the People's Liberation Army to cross over to Taiwan. From the PRC's perspective, the separation of Taiwan from China was first caused by Japan's colonization, and then by the US intervention, which often reminds people in China of this century of humiliation.
May I interrupt you a little bit here?
Yes.
You mentioned the word colonization of Taiwan. This is very interesting because Japan is the only country in Asia that has colonies. And this actually they learn from the Western civilization.
Through Meiji Restoration.
That's right. They send some people to Europe, and they came back that colonies is what every country has. So Japan is the only one that learned this from the West.
Yeah, of course, they also colonized Korea, which is still a big problem today between Korea and Japan. So this history casts a long shadow over East Asian international relations. Now, coming back to Taiwan issue. So I think, since the very beginning, the PRC has never changed its policy of pursuing unification with Taiwan. While China has become more powerful now, Taiwan has become more democratic and more reluctant to join China. So from Taiwan's perspective, the ROC government was defeated on the mainland, but it survived and prospered in Taiwan. So more importantly, Taiwan gradually democratized in the 1980s. Most people in Taiwan today do not want to be part of a non-democratic China. So the nationalist party, Chiang Kai-shek's party, in Taiwan, still pays lip service to one China, which includes both the mainland and Taiwan. But the ruling party, as you mentioned, Professor Feng, the DPP, basically argues that Taiwan is already an independent state, not part of China. Between 1949 and 1979, the United States continued to recognize the ROC as the government of China. In 1979, the US established diplomatic relations with the PRC and cut formal relations with Taiwan. There are 3 joint communiques between China and the United States in which the United States government acknowledges the Chinese position that there's only one China and Taiwan is part of China. However, US Congress passed the Taiwan Relations Act, which was signed into law by President Jimmy Carter in April 1979 to regulate the so-called unofficial relations between the United States and Taiwan. Now, based on the Taiwan Relations Act, the United States has continued to sell weapons to Taiwan to defend itself. And of course, in the past few years, US support for Taiwan has strengthened under both President Trump and President Biden. Now, if you want to poke China in the eye, pick the Taiwan issue, really. And I think the United States government knows it very well. As US-China strategic rivalry intensifies, Taiwan's value to the United States has obviously increased. US support for Taiwan is solid as ever. So the Taiwan issue has become a major source of contention between China and the United States. And peaceful unification between the mainland and Taiwan is becoming increasingly difficult, if not entirely impossible. So you ask me, what kind of positive role can the United States play? Well, given the strategic rivalry between China and the United States, I don't see any positive role the United States can actually play here. As we are speaking this morning, a missile-guided destroyer just passed the Taiwan Strait. show of force to China. So military tensions actually are going to continue to rise in that area. I hope that both sides of Taiwan Strait and the United States will come back to reality and recognizing the sensitivity of this issue, understanding the complexity of the problem from a historical perspective, but also from a pragmatic perspective. And perhaps, if they can sit down and seriously address the concerns from all sides, perhaps they can find a way forward. But I'm not seeing that happening. So again, on this issue, I'm also pessimistic, unfortunately.
Yes, I, of course, as spending 7 years in Taiwan, seeing the transformation of what it is today makes me deeply concerned about all my friends in Taiwan with the tenseness situation there. Well, let's go on to the second one, which is also a very, very interesting and, of course, intense issue on China's foreign policy. Well, I'm sure, Professor Zhu, you will not find many Chinese Americans who are born in India. In fact, technically, I'm not a Chinese American since I was born in India, and except for the first few years of my life, I lived in China. I really am a Singaporean Chinese, a Singaporean American. Sometime in the early part of the first few years in the 21st century, I discovered that on January 20th, 1946, the soon-to-be founding Prime Minister of India, because India was going to be independent soon, Jawaharlal Nehru, said to my father 12 words. In those 12 words, he said, "If India and China hold together, the future of Asia is assured." Indeed, while the two countries were side by side for millenniums, geographically speaking, and also except for the 1962 military clash, the two countries had existed peacefully for millenniums. With this as the background, knowing the enormously complex and difficult relationship which today's China and India has, which probably is spiced up by the foreign interventionists, especially with India now facing the severe challenge of COVID-19. How do you see these two countries can find a way to work together for the betterment of humanity? I should also add that my good friend Bali Deepak from Jawaharlal Nehru University is also online today. He is, of course, one of, if not the only, one of the top Indian-China relations expert, as well as one of the top experts in India about understanding Chinese culture. Professor Zhu.
Okay, thank you. So maybe we can invite Professor Deepak to say a few words afterwards.
Sure. Sure.
But so I will offer my comments briefly. As you mentioned, yes, India and China are two proud civilizations with long history and a rich culture. Shortly after they gained independence in 1947, 1949, respectively, the relationship actually started on a very good footing. In the 1950s was the golden era of India-China relations, marked by so-called IndiaChina Bahai, meaning Indians and Chinese are brothers. Now, as you mentioned, this border war in 1962, really cast a long shadow on the relationship today, from which the two countries have never fully recovered. So I think there are many factors that have contributed to the deterioration of relations between India and China, and I would just like to highlight three, perhaps. One is the legacy of the 1962 war. The other one is the security dilemma between India and China. And third one, you touch upon also, Professor Feng, is the involvement of third parties. So from India's perspective, China is of paramount importance to India's foreign policy. China's every move is scrutinized by Indians, and every problem with China is magnified by the India media. And China is really the first benchmark for Indians' aspiration to be a global power. Now, China, on the other hand, is fixated upon the United States in its foreign policy. Where India stands in the pecking order of China's foreign relations is simply anybody's guess. But there is no doubt China has not taken India very seriously. This cognitive gap, together with all historical and diplomatic disputes, has exacerbated problems in the delicate India-China relations. Now, while Indians have lots of complaints about China, the Chinese public tends to look down upon India for its poverty, its chaotic politics, and its poor governance, including its poor governance during the pandemic. India and China are engaged in economic and strategic competition in South Asia and beyond. The two countries are stuck in a classic security dilemma. Whenever one side attempts to consolidate its position near the border, the other side will view it as a security threat. In addition, the involvement of third parties, such as Pakistan's close alliance with China and the US efforts to entice India into its strategic rivalry with China, has made the situation more complex to handle. So I think both India and China perhaps right now tend to focus on differences between them. However, as the two largest developing nations, India and China actually share many interests, such as promoting domestic growth, safeguarding regional stability, combating poverty, and climate change. And obviously, right now, they can and should cooperate in containing the COVID-19. Both countries also desire to play a more active role in international affairs and to promote a multipolar international system. Their common interests clearly outweigh their differences. I think the last thing they need is a war which would doom both their domestic and international ambitions. You know, the Chinese have a saying, close neighbors are dearer than distant relatives. I think Prime Minister Nehru was right when he was talking to your father, President Feng. You know, I think your father was a journalist from China at the time, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So if India and China hold together, the future of Asia is assured. Well, let's hope that India and China will focus on their common interests and work together to improve their relations soon, instead of always arguing over their differences. As I said, you know, their common interests definitely are larger than their differences. And I hope that wisdom will prevail in both Beijing and New Delhi. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Well, of course, both China and India are two countries of deep and broad historical wisdoms. So let's hope that that is the case. But before I end this issue, I cannot help but ask Bali to say a few words here.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Feng, for giving me this opportunity. I largely agree by what Professor Tu has talked about India and China relations. Yes, I think the legacy of 1962 is very much there, but I'll take it further back to 1914 Shimla Conference. You know, from that, since I don't have much time to elaborate, I think it's primarily because India and China, so they never had common borders in history. I think that is why this peaceful coexistence for so many, for almost 2 millennia. So that is one aspect. And second, I also agree with Professor Zhu when he says that it's a very complex relationship. It has all sorts of elements. It has competition. It has engagement. It has co-option. It has maybe confrontation also, as we have seen it. But I still believe that there is enough room, enough space for India and China to build this cooperation, and I call it constructive engagement. I think that is the way out for India and China to go. Identify areas, so there are areas where you simply say no, because of security dilemma, as Professor Tu pointed out. But there are a lot of sectors beyond these areas where you have common interest involved, whether in the region, in South Asia or Asia Pacific, or even beyond. So I think India and China need to think beyond this confrontationist approaches and the negativity, especially on both sides of the border. There is huge negativity, and I slightly disagree with Professor Tu here, because I think there is as much as negativity in Chinese media as you see in Indian media. And since I'm a watcher of Chinese media, politics, I read Chinese, I see a lot of dirt there, which is being flung on India, especially during these times. And I think if we don't take care of each other's sensitivities, so then it would be a little difficult, and India would be pushed, as we see the trend, in the lap of United States, which is, making maybe things worse, whether it is Quad or Indo-Pacific strategy or various other domains of international relations, where now India is increasingly taking sides with the United States. It wasn't the case before, because India really wanted to take India really wanted to balance between these two countries, and then priority for India before it was Pakistan. I think India has devoted too much of time to Pakistan, but now that shift is increasing towards tilting towards China, which is not a good thing at this point in time. And this is because the security environment between the two has deteriorated, especially after Galwan. So I think I'll stop here, because it is primarily a discussion between Professor Feng and Professor Tu. So thank you, for giving me this opportunity to air my views. Thank you.
Well, I think that this is also becoming just the fact that we have two experts talking about this is creating a lot of interest among the audience, I'm sure. Well, let's get to the third issue. Professor Tu, as you know, my intellectual and emotional loyalties are split between the United States, which I'm now a citizen, and the country I grew up from, which is Singapore. In fact, when I came to the United States in 1964, I wonder how many people would know this, I was carrying a Malaysian passport. The reason is, or was, which I'm sure you know, because that between 1963 and 1965, Singapore was a state, quote unquote, within Malaysia. In fact, while I was growing up in Singapore, Malaysia and Singapore were considered as a single region, what we call a Sing Ma. Sing means Singapore, Ma means Malaysia. Malaysia and Singapore were considered as a single region. With this as my background, it is certainly not surprising to you that Southeast Asia is also a very much part of my intellectual DNA. In the past half a century, nations in Southeast Asia, just like China, have made enormous and numerous spectacular transformations. Nearly all of the betterment of the close to the population of 650 million. For example, my hometown, Singapore, has emerged not only as a global economic success, it is also now becoming one of the critical, if not the most important voices of ASEAN, or Association for Southeast Asian Nations, the 10 nations. In fact, quite recently, Singapore's Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong made it abundantly clear to the world that Singapore will not join any alliance if such an alliance did not include China as a member. This is perhaps the clearest signal to the world that nations in the region are exceedingly skittish about picking sides. With the recent signing of RCEP or RCEP, or Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which included all 10 ASEAN nations plus China, New Zealand, and Australia, the region is blinking brightly on the global radar screen. With all these developments of the past 50 years, when one talks about China and the world in the 21st century, especially with the Belt and Road Initiative, one simply cannot avoid discussing about how China could or should develop its robust and forward-looking foreign policies vis-a-vis ASEAN. With this as background, what do you think about this issue, namely how China should look in terms of Southeast Asia as a region? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Feng. I think Southeast Asia obviously is a priority in China's foreign policy, aside from major powers, United States, Russia, and EU, and other major countries, because Southeast Asian countries are China's close neighbors. There's a huge community of overseas Chinese in Southeast Asia. Now, if you remember, in the late 1970s, early 1980s, when Deng Xiaoping decided to establish the first 4 special economic zones, he picked 4 cities along China's southeast coast: Shenzhen, Xiamen, Zhuhai, and Shantou, all very close to Southeast Asia, and Taiwan, of course, where overseas Chinese sent foreign direct investment to China and helped China to grow rapidly. However, during the Cold War, many Southeast Asian countries actually were anti-communist and anti-China. Now, gradually, these countries established diplomatic relations with the PRC, one by one, as the PRC gained legitimacy in the international system in the 60s, 70s, and especially after the PRC was admitted to the UN in place of the ROC.
And after United States recognized PRC.
Yes, yes, that took a while. First 1971, then Kissinger and Nixon visits, and then took a few more years. 1979, finally, United States and China recognized each other. But Singapore, was the last Southeast Asian country to establish diplomatic relations with China in 1990, which was also kind of a breakthrough from Beijing's perspective, because this was after Tiananmen Square, right? So since then, relations between China and ASEAN as a group, and between China and these countries individually, have greatly expanded. Today, we all know that ASEAN as a group actually is the largest trading partner of China. And as you mentioned, China and ASEAN countries are part of the world's largest free trade agreement, the RCEP. ASEAN countries also have worked with China through participating in the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, the relationship, of course, is not restricted to the economic dimension. Educational and cultural exchanges, tourism, cooperation on energy, climate change, poverty reduction, innovation, etc., are also very dynamic. And especially Singapore, I think over the past few years, Singapore has emerged as the largest investor in China. And of course, Singapore has already built several innovative industrial parks in China, which were also very constructive and very helpful to China's development. However, The biggest problem we all know between China and some Southeast Asian countries is the South China Sea dispute. It's a very complicated historic issue, and of course now has become a diplomatic and strategic problem between China and some claimants, as well as between China and the United States. China appears more willing to use force and coercion to defend its interests, including in the South China Sea area. At the same time, US military activities in the region have become more active and routine, raising the possibility of direct military clash, which is very unfortunate to the countries in the region. Now, I would argue that despite this controversy, overall, the relationship between China and Southeast Asian countries has been very positive and mutually beneficial. And there is still huge potential to develop this relationship. It is also important to note, as you mentioned, Southeast Asian countries are unwilling to choose sides between the United States and China, as Prime Minister Li Xianlong recently mentioned. I think these countries want to maintain strong and productive relations with both powers. And I think other countries, particularly China and the United States, should respect ASEAN countries' policies of maintaining a balance between the two big powers and do more to promote peace and stability and common development in the region. So I think, again, using this Chinese saying again, close neighbors are dearer than distant relatives. Obviously, it is in China's interest to continue to maintain a strong and productive relationship with Southeast Asian countries, and at the same time, try to manage the South China Sea conflict in case it runs out of control. And it's a tough challenge, but I think countries in the region, even including the Philippines and Vietnam, apparently are willing to work with China despite their differences with China over the South China Sea. So compared with the Taiwan issue or the India issue, I feel a little bit more optimistic actually in the South China Sea area. I think there's hope that the relationship between China and ASEAN as a group and between China and individual countries in Southeast Asia will continue to grow and expand in the years ahead.
Yes, I agree with you. From my connections to all my Southeast Asian friends, from Indonesia to Malaysia to Singapore, I get the general feeling that they wanted very much to stay on, to have good relationship with both powers, because both powers provide different benefits to the region. China, of course, provide a lot of business opportunities, and the United States provide quite a bit of the security support for the region. That's very interesting. So let's see. Are there any questions from the audience? If there's
Thank you, Professor Zhu and Professor Feng. So we have now come to the Q&A session. I will prioritize questions that have not been addressed in the dialogue. So we will begin with a question from Jonathan Meter. He asks, for Professor Zhu, is there hope for a healthy competition or even collaboration for China and the US on issues such as climate change or renewable energy? And the next question is also similar from Larry Chastin. Is there hope for a healthy competition or collaboration for China and US on AI, artificial intelligence? So the first question is on climate change and renewable energy, and the second one is on AI.
Okay, so maybe I'll get started first, and Professor Feng can add. All right.
Sure.
I mean, I guess it's all of us hope that the United States and China will cooperate, not just on climate change, but also on a wide range of issues. it's our wish, it's our hope that, right? But I'm afraid that maybe it's our wishful thinking that they will actually cooperate on a wide range of issues. I mean, I would argue that there will be some limited cooperation, such as on climate change. I mean, not long ago, John Kerry, the special climate change envoy of the Biden administration, went to Shanghai, right? And the counterpart, Chinese counterpart. So the two countries are in discussion about how to manage, how to deal with the climate change. So that's a positive sign. But in terms of how deep they can go and whether they can cooperate on other issues, especially AI and high-tech areas, I'm less optimistic. I think, it all depends on the mindsets of both sides, especially on the US side. How does the United States view China's growth, right? Because right now, as I mentioned earlier, the United States views China's growth, China's challenge, as a direct threat to national interests of the United States. So with that kind of a policy framework, with that kind of a mindset, how can we expect the United States and China to cooperate on a wide range of other issues, including nuclear denuclearization, Iran, North Korea, and right now Middle East, right? I mean, there are so many areas that they can and should cooperate. But unfortunately, because of the strategic rivalry going on between the two powers, I see only limited opportunity for cooperation, and particularly on climate change. But on other aspects, I think cooperation will be very difficult. And I will stop here. Professor Feng can perhaps add something.
Well, I think that at the moment, what is important, as far as you have emphasized, Professor Zhu, the US government is sort of stuck in the mindset of viewing China as the strategic competitor, and although that word is not used yet, as an enemy. I think that it is more important that American public and the Chinese non-governmental public can establish more collaborations. Recently, just a few days ago, I'm so happy to see that there is an announcement that the top people, the China's CDC director, China's CDC director, and the University of Pennsylvania distinguished professor who is responsible for creating the vaccines, will have a conference, a Zoom conference to be held soon. I think these are the areas where one should pursue more and more, both in terms of global warming, or more important, climate change, and in terms of these pandemic of the global sense. Somehow, both the United States and China, I think China understands, at least from the way that China discusses it, China seems to understand a little bit more than the American government, is that pandemic, COVID-19 viruses don't need passports to travel. And I think that these are international and global challenges of all countries and all people. Politics, as we understand it, should play no role whatsoever. And if we don't understand that, both in the United States or in some sense China or even India, then I think the humanity is doomed. I think we should point that out over and over again, that we are facing a global challenge for humanity, not a challenge of China on US or vice versa. or India and China, or vice versa. And if we cannot, with our history, with our wisdom, and so on, cannot come to that understanding, what hope is there for humanity? So I think that the higher educations in all these countries should come out and voice this strongly, insisting that we should work together intellectually to solve these very, very strong human challenges. Now, I think the other question was about artificial intelligence. Is that right?
Yes.
Do you want to say something, Professor Zhu, about that?
No, I already kind of answered the question.
Okay.
My
All right.
sense is that it's very difficult. I mean, using Huawei as an example, the United States is very sensitive to technological challenges from China. So
right.
I don't think we can expect cooperation, in that area.
Well, that is certainly true, and but with artificial intelligence, there is a global challenge also, and that is artificial intelligence may very well replace many, many jobs, both in the US and China. I think these two countries, which are really advanced in AI, should work together on this issue, how to overcome the fact that more and more people will be out of jobs because of artificial intelligence. Anyway, so I think that's enough for now for this question. I think it's a very exciting and important question that was raised. Thank you. Bunhui, any more?
Yeah. Okay. So the second question is from Clark Rubino. He asks, what advice do you have for American social entrepreneurs in China who want to help and do their part to help Chinese in the development process and wish to continue to live peacefully and happily in China? As you have said, relations will become more tense. So to what extent will the small and medium-sized owned businesses be affected? Might we see a reclosing of the country or anything likened to what happened during the Boxer Rebellion?
Professor Feng, do you want to go ahead? Is this one?
Why don't you start first?
Well, this is a very specific question about the entrepreneurship, right? Small, medium businesses. I'm less familiar with this. I mean, I think, overall, the business community has been playing a very positive role in promoting cooperation between the two sides. However, in recent years, American business people in China have become more critical of China's practices, right? Especially in terms of property rights, and they used to be the sort of the anchor of this relationship, but now I think some are perhaps planning to leave China and invest somewhere else. So I think it's unfortunate for both sides to lose this community as a kind of backbone of the productive relationship between the two sides. In terms of entrepreneurship, obviously, China has a long way to go. I think, definitely young people in China can learn from their peers in the United States in terms of creativity, innovation, and I think that's one of the reasons why so many Chinese students are coming to the United States to study, to pursue high degrees in science and science-related fields. Obviously, the United States has much to offer for China as a more mature economy, as a more advanced, technologically more developed economy. But I think the broader picture here is that how this business community, how ordinary people, young folks especially, can tap into this rich resource and do something constructive to promote healthy competition between the two sides, not viewing each other as the enemy. But I think this healthy, this benign competition actually is good for both sides. As they say, a rising tide lifts all boats. So in that area, I think hopefully the younger generation on both sides will have more wisdom than the current leadership on both sides. So looking into the future, perhaps yes, there's potential for collaboration, in terms of entrepreneurship and innovation. I'll stop here.
Yeah, actually, something probably people don't mention, don't think about very much. As Professor Zhu surely knows, China and the European Union wanted to sign a investment agreement. This agreement sort of came to some understanding just before Biden became the president. And in signing this, in wanting to sign this agreement from China, China has lifted many of the restrictions that it used to have for direct foreign investments, such as transfer of technology, IPs, and so on. And I think that, unfortunately, the United States only see this as a competition between China as a country and the West, rather than let this go on and make sure that can happen, because that will benefit the European countries very much when they can invest into China without the restrictions that used to be placed on them. And United States could very well say that, that's great. And we want to also discuss with China so that American investments can also enjoy the same kind of benefits that the European investments have. Instead of that, the United States actually wanted to put a stop to it. I think that's a disappointment as far as I'm concerned, because United States can take a much bigger picture and a much bigger role in this. What do you think, Professor Zhu?
Again, I think it depends on how you look at the competition. And if you think that a healthy competition can actually help you, then perhaps you will not view this competition from China as something evil, something that has to be resisted. Actually, as you suggested, this kind of competition should be welcomed, should be embraced, because it can help both sides. But it's easier said than done, of course, because as I mentioned earlier, in Washington, D.C., everything about China is so negative. It's impossible to even make such kind of suggestions to these politicians in Washington, especially members of Congress. You'd have to say something nasty about China. So I think this voice of promoting cooperation is very weak in the United States now, especially in the policy circle. But I think at the grassroots level, perhaps there's some hope that people will see it more clearly than an average politician. They will see the potential in cooperation between the two powers. And I recently participated in a grassroots peace group in Massachusetts. They are promoting this kind of cooperation and trying to avoid war between China and the United States. And this was initiated by people at the grassroots level, not people in DC. So I think, as you mentioned, we have problems in the policy decision making process in DC. I think it will take a while for them to wake to the reality that perhaps China's rise is not that evil, and China's rise is a challenge, but can also be a great opportunity, not just for the United States, but also especially for developing countries to develop and promote peace and prosperity. So I think this change of mindset is very important. But in the short term, I don't think it's going to happen. Hopefully, in the long term, with more grassroots activities, with more exchanges between young people, especially, people will see China more objectively and treating China more as an opportunity than as a threat. And if we do that, I think it will actually be beneficial for everybody involved.
Very good. Hunhui, more questions?
Okay, so we will overrun a little bit. Is it okay if we go for another 2 questions?
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is from Diren. Diren said, first of all, thank you. Unfortunately, COVID cases are on the rise in Taiwan. Yesterday, a spokesperson for Taiwan said that China is slowing down the vaccine supply process. While China has an important soft power element like a vaccine to change the perspective of negative-minded Taiwanese, why doesn't China try it? How do you see China's strategy of making Taiwan dependent on Sinovac?
Professor Tu?
Okay, I can get started. So this is about vaccine diplomacy and the rising cases in Taiwan. We all know that one of the Chinese-made vaccines has been approved by the World Health Organization, and China actually has distributed, has sent or donated or sold its vaccines to dozens of countries, especially in Asia, Latin America, right? I think several countries in Southeast Asia, for example, Indonesia, Malaysia, they use Chinese vaccine widely. Is a very interesting and unique case. We mentioned earlier, because of this animosity between the two sides, especially between the DP government, which is pro-independence, which thinks that Taiwan is not part of China, and the Beijing government, which insists on unifying with Taiwan by force if necessary. So you see these forces are pulling the two sides in opposite directions. I mean, ideally, Taiwan should get vaccines from the mainland, from China. It's convenient, it's reliable, but the politics obviously is in the way, and especially the DPP government. It is so anti-China that anything to do with China must be resisted, including vaccines from China. So I don't think it's an easy solution here, because both sides are adamant on their positions, and especially the DPP government. They are not willing to, even if China offers help, which I believe the State Department, I mean, that's the Chinese Taiwan Affairs Office has offered to help. I don't think, the Taiwanese side, the DPP government, will be willing to accept any assistance from Beijing, because if they do that, it will be perceived as making concessions to China, as being willing to yield to China's pressure, as being willing to unify with China eventually. So all these kind of political considerations are behind the DPP's decision making. So there's no way Chinese vaccines will be, will be actually into Taiwan market anytime soon. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon.
Interesting. Let me stay on this vaccine diplomacy a little bit more. I want to ask Bali, Dr. Bali Deepak. India, of course, is facing this enormous COVID-19 pandemic right now. And is India willing to accept Chinese vaccines? And how does, have you heard whether China is willing to help?
Well, thank you, Professor Feng, for asking me this question. In fact, I'm very, very critical of my government's vaccine policy as such, because to me, it appears extremely haphazard. It is not unified at central level. It is negotiating different price, and for states, it has asked states to compete in the international market for vaccine procurement, which is utterly bizarre, and I don't see a logic therein. But as far as central government is concerned, I don't think it has expressed its willingness to purchase vaccines from China. But as far as state governments are concerned, in fact, some of the governments, so when they are issuing these bids for procuring investment, yesterday Tamil Nadu, which is also one of the red zones as far as COVID-19 is concerned, so they in fact have invited Chinese companies to bid. So this is a new development in India, and maybe other states, when they are procuring it in the international market, so they will also follow the suit. So it may happen. And China, of course, right from April 22nd, I would say, and all the way to April 30th, when President Xi Jinping talked to Prime Minister Modi over a message that they are willing to help and support India to fight this COVID menace. But I will add a little thing to my previous comment. I think it will make a sense here, because I seriously believe, which is, I have also argued in my other writings and in my book also, India-China, Beyond the Binary of Friendship and Enmity. I think, the basic understanding and equilibrium between India and China, it has been lost. Primarily because of the rise of China, primarily because of these asymmetries in their relationship, whether they are economic, technological, or even military. And it is because of this, I think, the China's assertiveness or coerciveness, which Professor Zhu was pointing to, even in the case of United States, when it has bridged the technological economic gap, with the established hegemon. So naturally, I think so that would be reflected elsewhere also, and we can see that the power shift which Professor Zhu was mentioning, it is also reflecting in this relationship. So how do we come out of it? I think it depends on a lot of factors. It depends how resilient Indian economy will be in the coming days. It will depend on how it manages its relationship with major powers and maybe various other factors in the vicinity and in the extended neighborhood. But I'll stop at that. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Zhu, I think I like to bring in an issue that has not been discussed yet, but I think right now everybody's talking about it. As a physicist, I was a physicist, and I have had long and deep connections with the Israeli scientists, many of whom I consider as my mentors, collaborators, and certainly good friends. This is the reason it pains me to see that in the last 2 weeks, there are bloody exchanges and deadly weapons between the Hamas and the Israeli Defense Force. It seems that the issue of the statehood of Palestine once again is becoming a front page story in the world. With this as the background, the fact that China is now the rotating chair of the United Nations Security Council, and that the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi stated openly that this will be one of the issues he will discuss during the council meeting in May. For the many decades since World War II, it seems that China essentially has no role in the Middle East. However, for Wang Yi to openly state that China's position on the Palestinian statehood so openly, does that mean China is now taking a new state, a new stature as far as the region is concerned? Can the new Chinese new foreign policy, new in quotes, for the Middle East be a new ingredient to change, however difficult that is, the course of the long and hateful struggle in that region?
I think the Chinese approach to the Middle East, the current approach, is not really new. I mean, yes, China's influence in the Middle East has been limited, but since the 1990s, with expanding Chinese investment in the region, especially recent years with the Belt and Road Initiative, China's influence is beginning to grow in the region, but still not as high or deep as the US influence in the region. I want to mention that actually, in terms of Chinese foreign policy, developing strong relations with both Arab and Muslim countries and Israel has been a long-standing policy of China. It's not surprising that you mentioned Wang Yi at the UN National Security UN Security Council meeting, who offered to bring representatives of both Israel and Palestine to Beijing to have a dialogue, to negotiate. By the way, actually, this is not the first time China has done it. I think 2017 when Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and Palestinian head of state were both visiting China. The Chinese Foreign Ministry actually offered to have a meeting between them, to mediate between them. But
did that happen? Did that happen?
No. Yeah. That's unfortunately neither side, accepted that offer. So it didn't happen actually. So yes, more recently China is becoming more and more interested in getting involved. Why? Because China has interests in all these countries. By the way, I mean, China is one of the very few great powers, external powers, that has maintained strong relations with all these countries in the region. I mean, we all know the United States tries to maintain a balanced approach over there, but of course, people perceive the United States as biased towards Israel, and it has become a problem for the United States to really come up with a plan or proposal that is acceptable to both sides. But China is viewed as a more impartial, more balanced, and I think as China's influence grow in the region, China is even expected by countries in the region to play a more active role. This two-state solution, for example, is strongly supported by China. I think the Chinese government believes that that will be a long-term solution for Palestinians to have their own state with East Jerusalem as its capital. And at the same time, I think the Chinese side also understands that Israel has the right to defend its sovereignty and its civilians. And by the way, of course, China has huge investments, in all these Arab countries as well as in Israel. And recently, of course, China and Iran signed this 25-year deal, which involves like $400 billion, right? Right. China has huge interest in other, Middle Eastern countries, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, Qatar, China has actually, in terms of diplomatic importance, China has put the countries into different categories, right? Like using these diplomatic labels, comprehensive strategic partners. China has 4 comprehensive strategic partners in the Middle East. They are Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iran, and Egypt. Now, how about Israel? Now, Israel, of course, is not a strategic partner of China. Israel is a strategic partner of the United States. So China cannot call Israel a strategic partner. But China put Israel in a unique category. Israel is called an innovative, comprehensive partner of China. And only Israel fits into that category. And we all know that the Jews and the Chinese have a long history, right? Going back to at least the Tang Dynasty, when maybe not so early, Tang and Song Dynasty, when the first group of Jews actually went to China, settled down in Kaifeng, Henan province, right? And then, of course, the Jews suffered during World War II, during Nazi German control, the Holocaust, and nearly 30,000 European Jews were able to settle down in Shanghai to find shelter over there. So the Jews have been very grateful to what China did to helping those Jews. So, fast forward now, Israel and China really enjoy strong relations, despite the fact that Israel is a strategic, is a military ally, has this alliance with the United States. Israel and China have cooperated in many aspects. Energy, environment, high tech, AI, and water project, agriculture, So, and China has also invested in some key infrastructure projects in Israel, including this major new port in Haifa,
Right.
which has raised some concerns on the U.S. side, because the new port is pretty close to where the U.S. Sixth Fleet ships would dock. So obviously, China wants peace in the region, and China has its own interests to defend. So that's why I think Wang Yi was calling for ceasefire. And first of all, lives should be saved and protected. No more fighting, no more violence. That's number one. Number two, long-term solution is to have a two-state in the region. So this has been consistent, Chinese policies over the years. And I think, as Chinese influence grows, yes, China is likely to be more involved in regional affairs. But as far as competition between China and the United States goes, I think the United States still has the dominant influence in the region. China's influence is still very limited.
You mentioned in your discussion just now about the amount of Jews that went to Shanghai during the World War II period. There's an interesting history here, which I'm sure you know, but people may not know generally. And that was, this particularly happened in Austria, when the Nazi regime basically told the Jewish population that if you can find a country that will accept you, you can go. If not, face the future, face the terrible situation if you stayed in Europe. And so the Jewish population went to many countries' embassies to ask for help. And even the United States would not accept them. The only country which accepted them is China at that time. Of course, it's Republic of China at that time. That ambassador of the Republic of China in Austria, even without having the permission to do so, basically gave visas to over 20 or 30,000 Jews to go to China. And they went. And these 20, 30,000, by the way, one of them was his name was Blumenthal, who was one of the U.S. I think state secretary, where he grew up, and so every Jewish friends that I have know about this in their heart, and they are absolutely grateful to China. Never mind about whatever Chinese politics is. They are just terribly grateful to China for this. And I think that therefore the Jewish relationship with China has a special place in the world because of this particular ambassador in Austria. So I think that for China now to come into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, they have the ability to talk to the Jewish population in the world, and Israelis in particular, that a better solution that China can broker would be a good one, rather than waiting for the United States to solve the problem. What do you think?
I think some people would definitely think so, because the United States is really perceived as a biased, third party.
Right.
And United States, of course, stands firmly with Israel, and the United States also talks to people in Palestine. But I don't think the United States enjoys the complete trust of both sides. I think probably you're right. I think in this case, perhaps China is better positioned to bring the two sides together. Although China has interests on both sides, China is perceived to be more neutral. China is definitely will defend Palestinian cause, because from the very beginning, from the 1950s, actually, China has strongly supported this Palestinian cause from Yasser Arafat, to contemporary period, but it's part of the Third World, and China perceived itself to be a strong ally of developing countries, third world countries. Now, on the other hand, of course, Israel has become a major partner in China's economic modernization, and also the Belt and Road Initiative. So with that context, I think China perhaps can more persuasively to talk to both sides and propose something that both sides can accept, including a permanent home for Palestinians, and also no challenge to sovereignty of Israel and the security of Israeli people. Both are important. I just don't know how that can be achieved. I mean, it's not going to be easy, right? It has been decades. The situation has become worse, actually, now. It takes time, maybe, but also some creative thinking, for all these parties involved to come up with a feasible, viable solution to this one of the most difficult problems in world politics today, actually.
Right. Wenhui, let's have one more question. Last one.
Oh, one more question. Is that okay with Prof. Chu?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Okay. So one more question from Shuozhen Bao. Bao said, "Thank you for the wonderful dialogue. I'm wondering why southeastern countries consider U.S. as a security guard. Who do you think will be the threat to them in the political mindset? Is it China? But we know that from history, China didn't colonize other places while some Western countries did. Are they afraid of the rapid growth of China will lead to a bad situation for them? If so, why would they think so? Thank you.
Okay, very interesting question. So, who is the security threat to Southeast Asian countries, basically, right? I mean, it depends on who you ask. If you ask the Philippines, most likely they will say China, right? If you ask Cambodia, most likely they will say Vietnam, perhaps, right? I think this U.S. security assurance, U.S. security protection of Southeast Asia goes back to the Cold War. Actually, this is not just happened yesterday. Okay, so during the Cold War, actually, when NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was formed, the United States was also trying to help Southeast Asian countries to form a similar group called the SEATO, Southeast Asian Treaty Organization. Those are, if you know the history of international politics, NATO and SEATO were basically anti-communist blocs, right? And NATO, of course, still exists today. It's still security focused, against Russia, right? But I think it has taken on more roles, such as security cooperation, even economic cooperation, right? In Southeast Asia, it is more complicated, So major powers have been involved in the region. Soviet Union, the United States itself was fighting a war in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam, right? And now China. So I think for some countries, definitely they would consider China as a security threat, but others definitely will not think that way. But since the United States has been involved in the region for decades, the United States itself has a huge stake over there. That's why the United States has sent warships, to the region, and the United States has beefed up its military presence. The United States has strengthened its military alliance with the Philippines, with Thailand. But the question is, through these actions, has the United States contributed to maintaining peace and stability and development in the region? That's a question open to debate, I guess. From the Chinese perspective, they argue that the U.S. military presence in the region contributed to instability in the region, and also raises the possibility of either intentional or unintentional military clashes between China and the United States. But of course, going back to what I said earlier, the whole region of Southeast Asia, especially South China Sea, has become a venue of US-China strategic rivalry. So obviously, from a US perspective, they would point out China's aggressive policies recently in the South China Sea area as evidence of China's growing threat to the region. But again, from a China's perspective, it's the other way around. Who is contributing to development and peace in the region? And the Chinese side can give all these examples of how China has invested in the region, how China has helped those developing countries in Southeast Asia to develop through investment, through infrastructure building. So at the end of the day, I guess it is up to Southeast Asian countries themselves to decide, who is their major threat. But I think more importantly, I think these countries should think beyond this negative lens. I think they should ask themselves, who will contribute more to their development? And again, the answer may be different depending on who you ask. So I don't think there's a clear, simple and yes and no answer. Who is why they need this alliance with the United States, who is the biggest challenge to the region. It's not that simple. It's a very messy picture as I see it.
Well, I think that we have come to almost the end of this very, very extensive and broad discussion webinar. There are so many issues that we can discuss because China is really entering into a totally new global era and its foreign policy. For example, we have not discussed it all here. How does China and Japan forms a relationship? That we can discuss. And just by itself, it will be a session. Another one that I would like to at least bring out, I don't think we have time to discuss, but I want to at least throw this idea into people's mind. Professor Zhu, you have, if I'm not mistaken, in some of your writings, you have emphasized the most ignored continent in the world, and that is Africa. And Africa, of course, is now receiving more and more attention globally for various reasons. While this continent is quote unquote backward, certainly in the eyes of the Western world, a perception that came with many centuries of colonization, it is now receiving enormous focus from the rest of the world, certainly from China in the past 30, 40 years. As Professor Deborah Browdingen, professor at the Johns Hopkins University, who has spent her life trying to understand Africa, especially how China in the past 40 years have been one of the major countries from the outside world to reinvent Africa. It would be interesting for us to ultimately understand what is the importance of Africa to China. But unfortunately, because of the time, I don't think we have time to discuss that today. But I do want to let people think about this. Another issue, of course, anyway, so I think that with that, I want to thank the World Scientific staff members who has stayed up so late. It's 10:30 now for them in the evening, for organizing this China and the World webinar. I know that we have barely touched the surface of this profound and deep problem or challenge in the world. And I hope that if there are other opportunities, if there are enough interest, we could at some point in the future have another one of these where we will discuss some of the issues that was not discussed here today. Again, I want to thank all the people who attended today's session. And I noticed that very few people actually drop out in the last 90 minutes, which is remarkable. And I also want to thank, maybe quite serendipitously, Professor Deepak, who is willing to suddenly be drawn into some of the discussions where his expertise clearly manifests itself. So again, Bunhui, anything to add? Hello, Bunhui.
Hi, okay. So let me do a closing. So thank you very much. We have overrun, but we would like to thank our supportive audiences for staying with us. For questions that have not been addressed, we will compile and send it to the speakers. If they would like to reply, we will send their replies to the individuals.
By the way, this will also be recorded, right?
Yes.
Yes,
It
and
will
it
be
will be
available
on. Yeah, it will be
Facebook.
placed in the YouTube.
Yes. It will be available on the Facebook and YouTube. And so we would like to thank our speaker, Professor Zhu, and moderator, Professor Feng, for the informative dialogue. Please be welcome to submit papers or subscribe to our journal, China and the World, Ancient and Modern Silk Road, where more information can be found in the chat. So thank you very much, and we wish you a very great day ahead.
I just want to thank everybody, once again, for this great opportunity, and the audience and friends, who have stayed till the end. Thank you so much. Since Professor Feng mentioned so many questions that are untouched today, maybe we should have another session in the future to talk about all those other issues. And
Right.
I'll be glad to join
Well,
you once again.
I think the issues of Japan and Africa are really crying out for discussions. It is so important not just for China, but for the world at large. After all, China and Japan are the number 2 and number 3 economies in the world. And Africa with 1.7 billion people, and most of them young people, will surely have a profound impact on the entire world. And it's a continent that somehow we have not paid enough attention to. And China actually has made a tremendous inroad into Africa. Well, thank you again. Have a good evening, good morning, good afternoon, goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.